Let's have a quick look at the Coimisiún na Méin, or the Media Commission in Ireland. And this is from its webpage, right? So these are the frequently asked questions. Number one, what is it? So the Coimisiún na Méin is Ireland's media commission. Our role is to ensure and maintain a thriving and diverse media landscape in Ireland that facilitates a mix of voices, opinions, and sources of news and current affairs, as well as a safe online environment. Right. Our responsibilities are to oversee the funding of and support the development of the wider media sector in Ireland, to oversee the regulation of broadcasting and video on demand services, develop and enforce the Irish regulatory regime for online safety. Grand. Sounds all nice, right? So, what is our government structure? So we'll skip down to, we will publish our decisions and the reasons for them, and our decisions can be challenged in the courts. Our accounts are audited by the Comptroller and Auditor General, and we can be questioned by the Public Accounts Committee about our use of resources. So it also says we can be asked to appear before committees of the Oireachtas to discuss our work. We are required to provide strategy statements, annual work programmes, and annual reports to the Minister for Tourism, Culture, Arts, Gaeltacht, Sports and Media, and we will also make these public. Okay, so who funds ye? For 2023, the Coimisiún na Méin's running costs will be funded through a levy on providers of broadcasting services and by a subvention from government funds accounting to €10.5 million. In future years, the Media Commission will also impose levies on the on-demand and online service providers that it regulates. So their funding schemes to support the development of the media sector are funded by a proportion of the TV licence fee, supplemented by government funding for schemes. In future, Coimisiún na Méin will also be able to impose a levy on providers of audiovisual media services to fund a scheme to support the production of European works. So essentially what that's saying is it is funded by you, your taxes, and the TV license. It gets this funding from the government via your taxes, right? And it's also saying here that in the future it'll impose levies on internet providers, essentially online service providers. So I would imagine that the TV license will then roll into some sort of internet connection service, right? And they might scrap the TV license or reduce it drastically or whatever, and then introduce a new licensing requirement for people that have access to the internet. But keep in mind now that the funding for this thing comes from the taxpayers. It's government sponsored, government funded. And now let's roll on to this article from the Irish Independent. The headline: News media applying for €1.8 million state grants were asked to consider focusing more on climate change and the rise of populism. This is by Mark Tighe from Sunday the 6th of October. So, quote, a government expert group that helped award €1.8 million of taxpayers' money to media companies wanted greater coverage of climate change and the rise of populism overseas. Details of internal discussions about the Global Ireland Media Challenge Fund, what a terrible name, a scheme aimed at boosting media coverage of major geopolitical developments and the changing nature of Ireland's role in the world, have been released following a Freedom of Information request. So any public body, you are entitled to go and request details of how that body operates, where the money is going, how many employees it has, what's the average income of these people, all that sort of stuff. So far under the scheme, RTE has been granted €720,000, Virgin Media 500,000, and Journal Media 231.5 thousand, right? So the Irish Examiner, the Business Post, and Reach Media, the publisher of the Irish Daily Star and Irish Daily Media, all received 100,000 each. Bauer Media, the German owner of News Talk and Today FM, is to get 55,000. Look into this Bauer Media company, because they own a massive amount of different TV channels and news stations and radio stations. So at a meeting between the expert advisory group and department officials last November to discuss applications from Bauer Media and the Examiner, both were said to have unanimous approval from the expert group to progress the next stage of the process. Quote, a more comprehensive approach to proposals regarding the Middle East and North Africa. A memo of the meeting shows the expert group gave constructive feedback on areas for further discussion with the applicants. This included recommendations that the media groups consider a more comprehensive approach to proposals regarding the Middle East and North Africa and in the Golan Heights, such as Irish citizens in Israel and Palestine. The note said the expert group wanted more emphasis on the wider topic of climate change, and this is to include COP, the UN decision-making body on climate issues. So essentially what you're looking at here is government funds being released to different media organizations with an expert committee floating around to give their 2 cents on maybe how the funds are allocated, what they would like to see imposed, or what they would like to see from applicants who are receiving these funds. And what it turns around to be is just more of the same. Highly politicized stuff. And most likely a one direction approach in terms of these things, right? So again, if anyone needed any evidence or proof that your government is engaged in propagandizing people. You remember Leo Varadkar put aside, I think it was 100,000 euros at the time, for his PR. PR, public relations, is the word that Edward Bernays, the man who came up with the Madison Avenue sort of approach of sales, right? Of propaganda, of tying emotions to a product and selling the emotional lack or the emotional desire instead of the product, right? So substituting out the product. If you have this, you'll feel sexy or sort of a thing, right? So he gave propaganda the shiny name of public relations, right? And that's Leo Varadkar put aside 100,000 euros of your money to shine up his public relations or to propagandize the people. You'll also see in America that Barack Obama made it legal for the government there to propagandize the American people. It was illegal before that. He legalized that. In Ireland, you're seeing the same thing now. You're seeing the government reward, or I suppose dangle the carrot for media outlets. And then they're suggesting that, plausible deniability here. The expert council or the expert group are suggesting maybe you could focus on the rise of populism or climate change. And the rise of populism would be people getting up and voicing their disdain towards the government or their disagreement, right? So if you float back down here with me to here, so far under the scheme, RTE has been granted 720 grand, Virgin Media 500 grand. What if they recently released? I think they both released the documentaries about the protests in Ireland. And I had the unfortune of being somewhere where this thing came on Virgin Media the other night. And this documentary about Irish protest. And having been involved in it in some degree and having observed it over the last few years, it's just absolute trash. It's absolute trash. And if that's what they're paying for, and that's what the result is, then this money is absolutely not being used for the best interest of Irish people. It's been used to paint you a certain way if you've any disagreement with the government. And you're essentially being forced to fund your own enslavement, your own ostracization, and your own, what would you even call it? Your own smear from the government and from the media apparatus, which they go hand in hand now at this stage, barring maybe a few exceptions. But here's more evidence, if you ever wanted it, that your government is paying media outlets to spin narratives which are hostile towards the average Irish person. Here you go, black and white. Again, freedom of information, use it.